for a producer that's listening in now, what would be your advice if they're looking to put together an animated family feature? What are the ingredients they should be looking to incorporate?
Very good question.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kids Media Club podcast. I'm Jo Redfern and we've hit a milestone. Emily, what milestone have we hit?
Yeah, 100 episodes, lads. I think that's awesome. 100 episodes of
Whoa.
the Kids Media Club podcast, which is really, really great.
I feel even more honoured now to be a guest, actually. I had no idea I was 100.
Pipe down, Robert. We haven't introduced you yet.
Oh, sorry.
Well, the thing is with this milestone, and you may have noticed a few other things in the last year or so we're trying to build out on the podcast. One thing we are in the market for is testimonials. So if any of our listeners would like to give a testimonial about why you love the Kids Media Club podcast, why you listen to it, we'd love to have it, particularly if you're a big deal. If you're a big deal, definitely get in touch. And speaking of big deals, Andy, we've got another excellent guest this week.
Yes, we have. You've heard him already. He piped up earlier on in the show. He's somebody that's a friend and a colleague of mine, Robert Chandler, who has a diverse career. You kind of span in animated series on stuff like The Deep, crafting animated features like the Cantiville Ghost and The Amazing Mauricem. And we felt that since there's been a lot of discussion around kids media about potentially pivoting from series, which is a bit of a challenging market at the moment, to animated features, that Robert was uniquely experienced to be able to give a perspective on animated features for young and family audiences. So Robert, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Andy and Jo and Emily. It's lovely to be here on this momentous occasion of 100.
So I slightly kind of ran across your career and experience, but do you want to give us a kind of a brief intro for any of the stuff that I kind of missed out?
Yes, thank you. It's kind of wild in that it ranges from setting up the Mercury Music Prize in 1992, where I was, not just me, but with a couple of other colleagues, and I became the creative director of that, directing all the videos, the the multi-camera broadcasts, co-producing the program on the BBC, and so on. And that from there, I was in that really for the making of the videos and the camera work, because back then, even at the end of the 80s, early 90s, it was still pretty tough to break into television and nearly impossible to break into film unless you were wealthy or brilliant. And sadly, I was neither. So I just was fueled by passion. And so I've gone this sort of rather zigzaggy route to get to where I am now, which is my own film company. So I did that with the Mercury Music Prize because I'd been directing a music show for Japan, got the attention of the music industry. They asked me to set this thing up, which I did. And from there, I went to then set up a television department for a Radio 1 DJ and got to make some music documentaries on Kylie Minogue, on all sorts of Boy George. I made a series at his house in Hampstead. There are many stories about that. And had this sort of rather checkered career. Then I was asked, weirdly, by Pete Waterman, because I'd made a documentary about Pete and gotten very well with him. He knew that I could draw. And I did a Songs of Praise with Pete. I got him in the pulpit. We put a choir together to sing Christmas carols in Coventry Cathedral. It was a really lovely programme, actually won an RTS award. And Pete knew I could draw. He'd just invested in an animation studio in London and said, would I be interested in running it? And I said, absolutely. I was looking for a way out of regular television. It all felt a bit tabloid to me, if I'm honest. And so I joined Pete's new studio and started running that from there. And after about 5 years, and that specialised in anime and manga. And we were being approached by Disney and other companies that wanted us to break out of the anime manga bit, and so I left there and set up Space Age Films, and then instantly got work making pilots for Disney. none of which ever made it to air, as was often the way with Disney pilots. But
One
it
of
was,
which we worked on together.
we did, Ricky Doom, and just, once I left the animation studio, what's hard for me is I'm sort of super passionate about all forms of visual storytelling. And art, frankly, and I wanted my company, Space Age Films, to be able to make live action and animation, and that's not always easy because it's not much easier, but it's sort of easier if you can pigeonhole yourself and stick to that track. But I made it really clear to myself and to whomever I was pitching that we did live action and animation. And the first thing we got away was The Deep, and that was with Technicolor, sadly defunct. Who would have thought I'd be saying that? They came on board and we set that up, The Deep, as a television series. It's now approaching its 5th series, and we've made 65 half hours, which is quite an achievement.
Yeah.
Most of the work for that is being done in Australia, which is where the graphic novel originated, and my partner over there, Avril Stark, is brilliant, and just like successful producer, she doesn't let go of something until it's made or done or finished or exhausted, and then you have to bury it. There's an art to burying projects and saying no, that's never going to happen. You have to be aware of that as well. But yeah, so we got The Deep going, and then a live action movie for Sky Cinema, a romantic comedy, which I co-wrote and produced. And during COVID, that wasn't easy. But COVID also allowed animation to flourish, because there were a lot of actors out there suddenly not getting work, and we were able to take advantage of that. Studio animation or animators and people working in the industry are usually quite tech savvy. So when COVID hit and the studios were closing, we just found a way around that and all started working from home. And I managed to, with my co-producers, Emily and Andrew, we got The Amazing Maurice made as a feature film with everyone working remotely. And we went into that with a plan for it being studio in Hamburg, studio in Sheffield. Let's get on and make this the traditional way. But no, bang, COVID hit. And within a week or two, we didn't drop a beat. We kept going and just organised it so we worked remotely. And the Amazing Maurice came out well. And from there, I did Cantiville. I actually had 3 films greenlit in the same year, and this is a lovely problem to have. My family was saying, is that too much? And I say yes, but it's also good to have too much. This industry, you have to spread bet, because there will be years when you get nothing made or off the ground, and so 3 coming along at once was a lovely boon. And I like the fact that they're slightly different to each other. There's a nice spread, and I'm managing, I hope, to create a brand for my company that's a little wider than just like a children's television specialist or a film company that only does animation and so on. But I have to work quite hard at that. And Andrew, you're interested in that and the brand aspects of running a company and trying to be taken seriously in different fields.
That's fantastic. I mean, we were talking about the importance of pivoting, and it's like you're the Sultan of Swing. You've kind of moved from
Nice.
one position to another. So yeah, you kind of feels like you're very well qualified to explore. We'd like to kind of explore really that the opportunities or challenges around animated features, I think, is kind of
of course. And pivoting to me is natural because partly because what's at the heart of all of this stuff, and it feels cliched and a little obvious to say, but it's storytelling. And so it doesn't affect me in the slightest to go from live action to animation, from series to single feature or a franchise. I've also produced and written comedy for Radio 4. So it's how do you best tell the story? And without that wishing to sound too much like something you'd stick up in the kitchen on a screen printed poster. I still believe in that, in telling stories and telling them well, and finding the best way to do that, but also you know, as a child growing up, there was, for example, no merchandise surrounding any of the things I loved. And now, if you look at my office, I'm sort of surrounded by it. Some of them are my own. You know, there's Deep toys over there as well. And so I'm also I understand where fans come from. And not afraid to go wide. Okay, there's a movie, but there's also the spin-off TV series. As long as we can do something interesting with the series that the movie isn't doing, or there's the radio play, or the novelization, or the graphic novel, and so on and so on. So I think I've put it on my website that I do have a 360 view of things, whilst also being technically a movie nerd. And I mentioned a 360 view because I'm involved in a project at the moment, which I can't say what it is, but it sort of looks like a preschool series, but it's multi-platform. The creators are working with Roblox. They're building out. And when I was at the Berlin Film Festival recently, I was just soft pitching this project a little bit. And it was instructive, but also it was just enlightening, because you can't just go in and pitch it. Well, you can, but with this, I wasn't just pitching a movie. I was pitching the whole thing. And I think if I'd just been pitching the movie, especially for a young audience, it's sort of 4 to 6 years old, that's a really tough sell. But because I was pitching it as a multi-platform deal, it became very interesting to people. So we weren't just placing all of the emphasis on the movie paying back.
Yeah.
And if we make the movie at a certain price level, you could even regard it as promotion for the other stuff. And all those sorts of things are keeping, although it's making the industry uncertain, it's also keeping it alive and fresh. And you have to look.
So were you pitching for money for the whole transmedia offering, or were you going, I want money for the movie, but we're going to be doing this and this and this as well?
The latter, because the other people are looking after. And like I say, I was soft pitching because we haven't announced it yet. It is a project that's supported by the BFI, so I know I've got some weight behind it. But I was just testing the ground, really. And that multi-platform thing, of course, that's spreading risk if you're a financier. And also you're telling yourself you're not just, well, it's the same as spreading risk, but the brand is this wide rather than this wide.
Do you think financiers will increasingly look across platform? Because they do tend to focus on a certain channel or method of delivery, but actually to grow valuable IP, you do need that multi-platform strategy.
You're absolutely right, Joe. And basically what will happen is that the younger generations, once they acquire power, that will just be natural to them. At the moment, we're still fighting the older generation who are used to, and like me, love the old ways. But you can't stay in the old ways, you know, and that's actually why I love reading both of your posts, actually. Joe and Emily, on LinkedIn. It's really instructive, even if it sometimes makes me angry. I have to say, there are times I thought, oh my God, we're dismantling the film industry as I knew it. And we're all applauding this sort of, this spreading, which really reduces the impact of the stained glass window, above the altar in the church, which is a movie. We're that's all being diluted.
So
who am I to say that? So
in this new world, what do you think? What's your advice for a producer that's listening in now? What would be your advice if they're looking to put together an animated family feature? What are the ingredients they should be looking to incorporate within their project?
Yes, that's a very good question. There are two answers. One is if it's based on an existing IP, which sadly is the way of the industry, because it minimises risk. Then you have to look at how all those other IPs or parts of the IP fit into it. You have to not disrespect them. You have to really, and again, it's something that I'm very both aware of and I'm learning about through LinkedIn. Is how you can mobilize a fan base. And not only that, because that still regards them as passive, but it's the involvement of a fan base, and all of those walls, which I grew up having to sort of look up and think I'll never climb that wall, as a young boy wanting to get into the film industry, let alone work with in genres and with companies that I love. But now it's wider than that, and it's not exclusive. It's not an old boys club. It's not, oh, you have to be in the BBC, and in order to get to the BBC you have to be at university. That's mostly being dismantled, thank the Lord, and it is, or it should be, more democratic. There are still issues about how much wealth you need, and therefore it's not entirely democratic, but accessibility is mostly democratic, and the ability to create and the ability to get stuff out there, it's unrivaled. We should be excited about this. I love the fact that there's a tidal wave, a glut of stuff that I would just drown in if I weren't careful, just and drown in passionately, because I love it all. Whether it's a sole TikTok creator doing something astounding, or a massive Netflix Russo brothers movie which may or may not be a flop, I will still be there for both of those. To me, it's all about the art. If someone's an artist, then they have my respect.
And like, is the art of the series the same as the art of the film? Like, even from a financing point of view, it feels to me like they're quite different things if you want to get them made.
They are quite different, but again, it's pivoting. I can't really say the name of the project. Forgive me for...
You're on the tip of your tongue there, Robert.
I know. But we pitched a live-action movie to Netflix. Netflix said, yeah, we love this, brilliant. And then they said, could you do it animated? And we said, of course we can, because we're versatile, and that's what we do. And then they said, and could you make it a series, an animated series? So we said, of course we can. It's a natural fit. When it started out as a live action movie, and of course that never got made either because of the Netflix cull. But going through that process of it being a live action movie and then being an animated movie, and of course if you're an animator, the first thing you ask is, why is it animated? Why do we need animation for this? And then, okay, it's a series. If it's a 2-hour movie, then you have a finite closed narrative. You might be smart enough to set up the sequel, but it's still relatively closed. But for a series, it isn't. It's sort of longer and so on. And then, is it a limited series, or is it something you see going on? But again, that to me is storytelling. It's understanding how narrative works, how characters work. And then the pivot isn't just in changing the outward appearance, it's changing the engine and the heart of it.
It's always like, oh, sorry, go Joe.
I was going to ask, do you think that some of the younger producers that are growing up in a multi-platform world where they're consuming content across a number of platforms, often fluidly, do you think they're at an advantage in being able to tell those stories in those different ways?
Yes, but what do you mean, Joe? Are you talking about the same story across those different platforms?
Yes, in articulating what characters and worlds are across those different platforms, because obviously you go onto TikTok and it's very much a 15 to 30 second articulation of your world, whereas you can go a little bit longer form on YouTube or on Netflix.
Yes.
Do you think that's almost inherent with this new generation of storytellers and producers coming up?
Yes, and new art will grow out of it, because it's not only the duration, it's also the aspect ratio as well, which can be a huge thing we fight over. To go portrait or landscape is a natural thing. Cinema embraced, it got wider and wider. 2.35 to 1 is my starting point for every movie, because it's widescreen, and maybe that's the old way of thinking. The idea of making a movie in portrait format is actually, that's quite exciting. What can we do with that? And it sort of goes back to the roots of cinema, where you almost basically had a square. So if you made a musical, you could see the whole body dancing. It was a lovely thing. You could really appreciate Fred Astaire.
Yeah.
Try putting Fred Astaire on a big widescreen, and it's not so easy. You can't see his feet. The beauty of Fred Astaire is to watch his feet at the same time as his torso and head. So embrace the changes and the different aspect ratios for what they can do, and make art.
Yeah, I think that comes back to one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about your experience pitching to Netflix, and the fact that it started as a live action, then went to an animation, and then went to an animated series. It made me think of Darwin's rule, which isn't survival of the fittest, it's survival of the most adaptable. And even in terms of that kind of aspect ratio, it's adapting to different aspect ratios. I mean, I think there's a danger with all of these things that we tend to think, well, we'll pin that we can pin that basically now it's portrait, it's not landscape, because while we're saying that, I'm reading that YouTube is doubling down on connected TVs, and they're changing their whole user interface to be more like Netflix and more of a almost more of a widescreen experience. So even within YouTube, creators are having to adapt to YouTube Shorts and YouTube the connected TV, each which brings different aspect ratios and different requirements. By just following that thought in terms of being adaptable, I guess I want to just bring it back to the pivots to animation series, to animated features from series. Is that there's an impression, I think, in the industry that series is really difficult and challenging, and the sunlit kind of green hills are where feature films are, and if only we could hike up that hill, life would be rosy and it'd be much easier. As somebody that's made that pivot, what's your perspective on that impression that the industry has?
Which is greener? Which is greener, Robert? Which is greener?
Yeah.
Well, ask me 6 months ago and my answer would have been different, and in 6 months' time it may be different as well, because of changes that have happened. Now, at Annecy last year, I was approached more often than ever before, and possibly than anyone else, with people saying, we make series, but we need to pivot into film. Can you help? And of course, I did as much as I could. I helped. I gave free advice, as I often do, and tried to generally help. And some projects have come out of that which are still going. But that was when we had one relatively sound investor in UK animated features, and that was Sky Cinema. Outside of Sky Cinema, there was nobody. You couldn't get an MG, a minimum guarantee, for the UK rights that was substantial enough to be meaningful in order to allow you to raise your finances. So we were in this weird space in the UK where we had this suddenly inflated tax credit, which was brilliant. And so Europeans were saying, can we co-produce with you? And I would say, yes, you can. But I can't necessarily match what you're bringing to the table, because we don't have an infrastructure here that would distribute films in a meaningful way to give me a good MG for the finance, unless Sky Cinema buys it. But if Sky withdraws from that, then where do we go? So yes, it's great we have a good tax credit, but where do we get the finance in the UK? Because the only way to really raise it is to be able to offer a good distribution mechanism. So that's quite difficult. So 6 months ago, would have said, yes, come to me, let's make a movie. And
who's
now,
left? Who's left in that space? Sorry, Robert.
Nobody.
Who's left? No one.
No. We're having sort of secret meetings about it. The cabal of animation producers, all three of us who make films, and an Animation UK, and some really good people putting our minds to it and seeing what we can do. But it's a tough one, and it's certainly...
not interesting. There's secret meetings happening on both hills.
Oh yeah, of course. Of course, or on our WhatsApp groups, a bit like the Americans, revealing their war plans. So we're doing the same, desperately trying to not only to save the UK animation industry, but just to stabilise it. That was enough. It's hard enough just to keep it stable. So if Sky isn't there buying, but it's that getting the money in up front, which is always the hard part of making any film. It's actually harder than making the film. That's why I said it that way. Raising the finance is such a you're exhausted, and then you have to make the bloody film. It's that old cliche. But that's why you have to be driven by passion or madness, really, because it can tire you out. So Andy, I would. It's difficult. 6 months ago, I would say yes, let's pivot, and here's how we do it. And now I have to ask, how are we going to do this? But as producers, we're optimistic. Otherwise, you couldn't do the job. And so, as ever, we look outside of the UK. I've got partners in Australia, India, Norway, Canada, Ireland, Germany, on various feature films at the moment, and we're all just finding a way to get them funded and made.
And are there opportunities in the US in terms of partners for features as well?
I hope so. It's been tough because they're all terrified in Hollywood at the moment, post-COVID, post-strikes. And COVID wasn't just about actors and cameras not turning; it was about the theatre chains falling apart. And now everyone in Hollywood, and then the fires, of course. And so the prime directive in Hollywood is keeping a job, not how do I finance this movie, which brings risk with it. And so it's quite tough, having a meaningful conversation with an agent in Hollywood. It's not what it used to be. You end up thinking, okay, well, find somewhere else. Let's go to Canada. The Canadian animation industry has collapsed a bit and is in a tough place, which on one hand is good for us because it means before it was slightly unaffordable because they could charge top dollar because they were so well looked after with their soft money that they could charge rate card prices and then some for the service work. Now you can get animation studios in Canada giving good prices and being competitive again. So that's one upside. Obviously the downside is that some studios have collapsed over there. So America maybe not so much, Andy. It's all Chinatown in a way.
Are you seeing any innovative ways of getting stuff made and financed that are? I mean, you've spoken about how you now have to spread your net wider. But are there any innovative models that you see emerging?
This multi-platform one is interesting, and we're keeping the budget low. It's under $5 million. And I'm going to talk dollars because that's just how the film industry works. And that means that it does mitigate risk. But if I go to a distributor and say this film only costs $5 million, they immediately assume it's not theatrical. They think it must be a direct-to-TV. And I've had one US financier say, we're only interested in animated features that are approaching 20 million with a budget because it gives them a sort of guarantee of quality so they can put it out in the theatres. The nice thing about the amazing... Sorry.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because it's like that thing, like I do think there's somewhat of a double-edged sword, and definitely we've talked on this podcast before about, the impact of the theatrical window and like how that has carried, that's been a prevailing wind that's carried many franchises down the road. At the same time, I do think there is an opportunity in straight to streaming films, like, the straight to DVD films of yesteryear, right? Like there is, like that was a viable model. There is a consumption gap there, and I think in the right state, like
there's a consumption gap, but I'm not convinced there's a finance gap.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the trouble. We can see all these sort of potholes, which are consumption gaps, but you can't fill them because you can't get the money to fill them. And it is about the money. It probably always is. And obviously, animation's getting cheaper. AI, if we can use that expression, will make it cheaper. And so I do see the whole thing as the sort of gradual democratization of art in every respect. But will that reduce the value of it? Yes, possibly.
And I guess the AI question is an interesting one because hearing you speak, there's almost going to be no choice than to use it. If you are desperate to tell a story in animation and funding is so hard to come by, then it narrows your choices to get your passion project made. So
absolutely, Joe, and not even and even in the pitching, people are using AI. It's used a lot in pitching, and often it's creating images relatively free of charge to the person creating them, and saying this is what the film will look like. And of course, we'll use proper artists when it comes to making the film. But the tail end of that hasn't really been delivered yet. Because putting a pitch deck can cost you $25,000. It might be more than the screenplay cost you if you know the right.
Yeah, and I think maybe the wariness in some respects of using generative AI beyond the pitch deck is the question mark over copyright and some of those issues, which kind of remain unresolved. But I think even if you even leaving AI to one side, if you look at free platforms like Blender or Unreal Engine, there's lots of ways in which technology enables kind of movies to be made much more cost effectively. I mean, I think Flow was made in Blender, and I think it's quite a difficult one to kind of calculate how much it costs, because I think a lot of people were sort of giving their time for free to make it. It's budgeted at around, I think, 4 million. I think was the budget that they came to. Yeah, and I totally see how those costs are going to be driven down more and more. Is there a space opening up, do you think, for that low budget animated family feature?
As soon as you said family, I nearly jumped in and said absolutely. But when you said family, I held back a bit, because family, it's one of those terms. It's, what does it actually mean? And I mean, it's like when people tell me, "Oh, this is a chick flick," I bristle at that. You know, I just think, why? Let's just watch this film. And so I don't like categorizing things at all. I'm also the sort of person who hates the words kids, for example. I just think they should be called children. And so
we can't change the podcast name.
No, I know.
I'm sorry, you've been a guest once. We're not going to change the podcast name for you.
No, but I don't.
Robert's testimonial. Wish it wasn't called kids.
Yeah, no, it's trying, as with my age, it's just trying to sort of stay young and vital, but at the same time recognize what's precious. And one of the things that's precious is
an enviable head of hair, Robert. You're still young and vital. And you know, when I talk about art, it's like a dirty word to a financier. You can never say your film's art house, because they will just show you the door straight away. But in your heart, it might be. And I'd like to think that with all the AI changes, that there's more room for art house, for the film that's made to be watched in portrait, that way up. That's a horror film. And can be consumed in 1 minute pieces that you release every night at midnight or something. And I think so. The more you embrace the differences and all these platforms, the greater the chance of art we have of making art. And actually, one thing that I think AI will definitely be used for, without question, is that you're going to be able to kind of push a button and have your content be reformatted in every single aspect ratio that it might need to be reformatted in, from landscape to portrait.
But that makes me bristle as well, because if you're a cinema photographer or an artist, as you are, Andy, you're composing the frame is crucial. It's how you tell the story.
Yeah.
And I consider that entirely the frame, entirely. And so the idea of framing from the center out in order to please a portrait TikTok version,
there's an interesting.
anathema.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great Instagram account that basically the whole point of the account, it reformats movies as landscape, but it does it quite sensibly. So I think there's a way in which that Rubicon could be crossed.
Are they using AI to do that, Andy, or are they doing it?
No, they're just doing it kind of with
themselves.
That's like pan and scan, the heresy of pan and scan television.
Well, actually, Emily, you said, are they using that? They may be using like an Adobe extend on the background to make it fit in. So, yeah, I'm not sure.
And this idea that technology democratizes access, which I think is amazing, and it's going to unlock stories that hitherto couldn't be told because there were gatekeepers and barriers in the way. But that said, you talk about art very eloquently. How do established, experienced filmmakers and storytellers such as yourself then pass that on to this new generation for whom the barriers have lowered, but actually they've not done the hard yards?
We don't need to pass it on. If they're good enough or interested enough, they will pick it up themselves and take what they can and hopefully kick us out the way, because that's all I wanted to do when I was younger. There was no training course. I don't actually believe in training, for example. I just think just do the work and learn, or teach yourself. And so,
well, was it Orson Welles said you could learn everything about filmmaking in like a week?
Yeah, just by watching John Ford's Stagecoach.
Yes.
Was it David Bailey who said the only thing they can't teach you at art school is art? How to be an artist. And so they don't need us, the younger people. They're doing it already. They're doing it for themselves. And you know, you guys are really aware of this. You're sort of at the forefront of reporting on it. So yeah, you know, the kids are all right. I'll put the word kids in there for you, but you know, David
We're going to
Bowie.
list that. That's going to go in the testimonial.
No, but you know, but I'm also a believer in not censoring anything, and that does fall down under scrutiny. That comment, but I generally think that artists and that's both a precious term and an unprecious term. Whether you're a singer or a painter or a writer, you find the way. You don't need any. You know, it's good if it can be nurtured or not crushed by your school or your peers or your family or your social conditions or whatever. But art always finds a way.
Yeah, it's so like it's such a breath of fresh air speaking to you. Also, slightly, you know, worrisome for the industry. But like, what I really appreciate is that when it comes to this pivoting and adaptability thing, it feels to me like at the heart of it is curiosity and a lack of ego, right? And I think it's wonderful to hear you talk about like make a TikTok, make whatever, right? You know, like figure out how to make it work. And no, you're not going to be framing it by AI, Andy, because it's not going to be good enough. And you know, I love that. I love that, and I do sometimes worry that when we're talking about people in the industry going, "Oh, series, I'm going to do film," they feel like a TikTok is below them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I think that's where the ego comes into this a little bit.
Yeah.
And that having just being free of that and being just curious about how it might work and how you can make it cool is
yes, and how you watch it as well. There's such snobbery in that, and I'm a cinephile. You know, it's pretty obvious, and so. But if someone watches a phone on a film, sorry, if someone Freudian slip, if someone watches a film on a phone on a train, they're still watching the film.
Yeah,
and that to me is more exciting than someone not watching a film. I grew up in a time when I would go to weird places, probably at risk to my safety, to see obscure John Waters films, or you know, or Andy Warhol's Dracula, in really dingy places. In all night screenings on a Saturday night, and sometimes they were dangerous places. But we did it. Now I can watch that film on my phone in 2 seconds, and I don't mind that. I think that's good. There's a bit of me that mourns the loss of the pilgrimage to the dangerous site to see the work of art, but at the same time, the fact that I can watch it on my phone now and even share it on screen with you guys, and is a brilliant thing. How can you not think that's brilliant? So you've got to embrace the technology if you can, and yeah, get it made, get it shown, and that counts whether you're 15 or 51, whether it's a small budget or a really big budget, because you still put heart into it. And I've worked on really low budget films, and they've been, you know, just as hard to make as the really big budget films, and so on. And so
it's funny that
you're not seeing the budget, you're just making the thing.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? Sometimes you find that the job with the low budget is almost more difficult than the job with the bigger budget.
Oh, it is. It invariably takes more time. Yeah.
One of the things I'd love to get your thoughts on, because you've had kind of a lot of experience working with sort of big established IP like the Terry Pratchett estate. I mean, The Deep is
Oscar
also
Wilde.
one that Oscar Wilde's. Although kind of, I'm not sure whether you'd have had to kind of, I don't know how much you'd had to deal with Oscar Wilde's opinion on the Cantiville Ghost.
No, but we had people saying, don't put Oscar Wilde on the poster because the youngsters won't know who he is. So it was the opposite. And I had to deal with that. And I wasn't very, I was talking to, name dropping, but to Stephen Fry about this, about, oh my God, they don't want us to mention Oscar Wilde on the poster. What do we do? And he said, we fucking mention him, you know.
But the one thing I wanted to ask you about was, what would be your advice then for people that are kind of looking to work with established IP owners in terms of what are kind of the do's and don'ts in terms of how you approach them and manage that situation?
Well, it's approach as a fan. Having said that, I was talking to somebody earlier who was, as a business person and put a really good business proposition together for a piece of IP, and it worked. So as long as you are honest about that, then that to me is good. But I think for me, it's approaching as a fan, letting them know that you're a fan, but not a sort of weird nerd. But you actually do have a good business head as well. That's crucial. And that's not because we're dry businessmen. It's because we need the thing to actually get made and thrive in the market. And therefore, the only way to do that is to be sober and grown up about it. So approach as a fan. Let them know you have solid business head on. And then listen. You have to listen. We got on really well with the Terry Pratchett estate because we listened to them. We didn't just sort of think that we knew better, because we don't. And to the estate, often when an artist dies, the work gets frozen and then it becomes revered and it becomes like scripture. It's no longer an evolving thing. And so you can butt up against quite a solidified view of the work. And so you have to be aware of that as well. But then talk, and show that you've, either your stuff or you've done your homework or you're honest about what you haven't read and what you don't know. And then just work it out together. We got the estate involved in every aspect of The Amazing Maurice, every aspect. And, on one level, it's making sure that the film is made in a way that honours the author. The estate respected us because we were being honest with them, so that we could say, no, we'd like to change this. And they say, yeah, and we'd say, why? And they'd get that. And it also meant that we stood together when the film was released, because then you're pushing it out to the fan base. And the fan base is opinionated, and you cannot please all of them. And so you will get people upset because you've changed something tiny to you, but possibly very big to them. And that's good as well. You have to listen to that, but also stand by your decision and say, no, we had to change that. And having the estate with you on that journey, it can be crucial. For example, we got the estate to announce the film first so that everybody saw that it was endorsed by them.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
What's the one movie, aside from the ones that you have made, what's the movie you either wished you'd have made or that you would make?
Well, I still want to make a form of Dracula, and that's one of the top 3 characters who's had films made. And so how do you create something fresh into that and honour the source material, Bram Stoker? And so I think I've done that. I've written a treatment. So that I'm hoping that might come along. Generally, Joe, but that's an adaptation. And because I'm a purist at heart, for me, it's still about original material. I wrote a film once about the world's last remaining lion that we never got made. I pivoted that into a potential manga, but a story about the last remaining grizzly bear, pardon me, and a girl who was trying to return it to the wild so that it could die in the wild. And that was loved. And then the studio went bust. I'd like to go back to that at some point. And I wrote a film called The Church of Peter Lum about a filmmaker who lost his faith in what film can do, and his marriage. And he built a church. He bought plots of land and built a church. And he wanted to create a new religion based on what he'd learned in life. It was a fresh start, and then he gradually people came and listened to him, including the studio he used to work for, and that never got made. So it's a couple of original things that are in the drawer that you tell yourself you will get round to making one day, and then possibly never will. And sometimes it's better because then they're never spoiled by actually being compromised as they get made.
Well, you never know. We've got listeners all around the world.
Yes.
Well, in celebration of our 100th episode, we get one of these movies made.
Well, let's see. Ultimately, I know it's down to me because every producer is Sisyphus. Every project is that bloody boulder getting it to the top of the hill, and you're invariably crushed by it. But that's why you do have to be mad and passionate to do this. I think. I mean, I'm probably still naive at my age. I'm still naive and idealistic, and there are people in the industry who are not like me, and it's good business, and that's cool. But for me, it's.
And Robert, as something for the listeners to take away in terms of the extremes of producing, what's the animated feature that's taken the longest time for you to develop and produce to get to the screen, and what's been the shortest experience?
And they both came in got greenlit the same year, and so the longest was the Cantiville Ghost. And we had a cast of Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, Imelda Staunton, Freddie Highmore, pretty high caliber cast. But
how long did that one take?
12 years. 12 years of unpaid labour.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Don't work out your hourly rate for that, Robert.
Well, when people say, "Oh, why are we paying the producers?" I had one animator on that project say, "Can't you just defer all your fees because we're the animators, we're doing all the work, And I thought, well, that's a naive question. God bless you. But no. So that was a long time.
And then the shortest.
The shortest was actually the Amazing Maurice was actually pretty swift, because a key person who was able to greenlight it left their job, and a new person came in, and she had a cat, and she fell in love with it, and so that made all the difference. And that's obviously a simple way of describing the process, but that came together quite quickly.
And how long's quickly on that?
4 years, maybe 3.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, 3 or 4. And normally, I as one gets more successful, you hope it gets shorter. You hope. And then COVID happens, then the writer's strike happens, and then the cinema chains collapse, and then Technicolor goes down, and so on and so on and so on. So it always seems to take way too long.
Well, I think that gives a real snapshot of the twists and turns and the ups and downs of producers.
Yeah. You have to just keep the fires burning somehow. I mean, with your passion, and keep going. And the other thing we haven't talked about is something that works for me. It may not work for everyone. It's just me. So Space Age Films, it's pretty obvious. It's just me. And I've been there. I've worked in bigger production companies. I've run a studio, an animation studio. And I find you can be nimble by being one person, and it's much more easy to adapt and be flexible. And then it's about partnering up with the right people. So choosing your partners wisely is probably my key message in this industry. Choose your partners wisely and to be honest with them, and make sure that they're honest in return. And then I do believe you can do anything. I told you I was naive.
I think that's a great message. It really comes across this passion, and like you said, in order to roll with the punches, and that's not just now in the industry. You talked about your career back to 1992. You've got to be passionate. You still got to love what you do.
Oh yeah.
You've got to be resilient, and that does a long career make.
I think so. I'm thoroughly engaged with it. And, Andy will tell you, I still write film reviews for every film I watch. And sometimes I post them and, we talk about them on Facebook or wherever. But it's important for me just to keep, I mean, kind of have no choice because I love it, but constantly exploring, never feeling you know what you're doing. Always trying to learn and improve and hope you can bluff it out and no one notices you don't know what you're doing.
Well, that's great.
Thank you.
Should we wrap up there?
Yeah, feels like a great place.
Fantastic. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, any one of the films we could spend an hour talking about because they all have their own sort of disaster movie storyline in how they got to the screen. People watching films or TV series have no idea what it took to get them there. None at all. And then they write their fucking, critiques on IMDb.
Everyone's a critic.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Robert. And thanks to you guys for listening. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And also don't forget the testimonials. We'd be ever so grateful if we get some testimonials for our new website. Thanks again to Robert for those lessons on adapting and thriving in challenging markets and making a success of animated features. And we'll see you next week.